Did you know there is a real criminal case so disturbing that it almost forced an American court to confront an impossible question? Not who committed the crime, but what committed it. In 1981, in Brookfield, Connecticut, a town known for being quiet, predictable, and deeply ordinary, something happened that permanently broke that illusion. This wasn't New York. It wasn't a crime hotspot. It was the kind of place where people leave doors unlocked and assume tomorrow will look like yesterday. Until it didn't. A violent killing ripped through the town and refused to stay contained. The accused was a 19-year-old named Arne Cheyenne Johnson. The victim was Alan Bono, a 40-year-old man connected to both Arne's work and the house where Arne lived with his girlfriend. On paper, this should have been a tragic but straightforward case of alcohol, conflict, and violence. But that's not the version the world remembers. Because almost immediately, another explanation entered the conversation. One that didn't belong in police reports or court transcripts. The defense would later claim that Arne Johnson was not fully responsible for what he had done, because he was possessed by a demon. And once that idea was spoken out loud, reality stopped being enough. What makes this case so unsettling is that it exists in two parallel worlds at the same time. In one world, there are documents, testimony, physical evidence, and a verdict. In the other, there is fear, belief, suggestion, and the terrifying idea that a person can lose control of themselves without realizing it. Here's what is not disputed. A man was killed, another man was arrested, a trial was held, and the judge refused to allow demonic possession as a legal defense. Arne Johnson was ultimately convicted of manslaughter. The law moved forward. What is disputed is everything that turned this crime into a legend. The alleged entity. The idea of a demon moving from one person to another. The phenomena described by witnesses. The role of paranormal investigators. And the uncomfortable possibility that belief itself may have altered the course of real events. To understand how this all began, you have to step inside a small house in Brookfield, Connecticut, at the start of the 1980s. Winter pressed against the walls. The town slept early. Life followed routines. And inside that house lived the Glatzel family, who would later say that their lives quietly collapsed from the inside out. According to them, their 11-year-old son David began experiencing episodes they could not explain. He suffered night terrors so intense that sleep became something to fear. He had sudden outbursts of panic, moments of aggression that seemed out of character, and unexplained marks appearing on his body. He claimed to see things, to feel watched, to sense a presence that didn't leave when the lights came on. From the outside, explanations are easy to list. Psychological distress, childhood trauma, sleep disorders, suggestion. And many skeptics have pointed out that once fear enters a household, it spreads fast, especially when adults are frightened too. But when you are inside the experience, logic rarely brings comfort. Fear doesn't ask for proof. It asks for relief. And when fear becomes constant, people stop asking what is likely and start asking what might make it stop. That's when the Warrens enter the story. Ed Warren was a self-taught demonologist and paranormal investigator. Lorraine Warren claimed to be a clairvoyant, someone who could sense presences, perceive atmospheres, and feel what others could not. By this point, they were already famous, already controversial, already followed closely by the media. Wherever possession was suspected, their names were never far behind. According to their accounts, they didn't encounter just a troubled child. They described an environment that felt heavy, charged, oppressive. They spoke of sudden temperature drops, strange noises, and a pattern that, to them, matched what they believed to be demonic infestation. Priests were allegedly involved. Religious rites were performed. Attempts were made to expel whatever the family believed was tormenting David. Whether you believe that or not, one thing is undeniable. Once the Warrens became involved, the story stopped being private. It stopped being small, and it started gaining gravity. At some point during these events, the story takes a turn that feels almost too perfectly shaped for a horror script. According to later accounts, Arne Johnson, David's sister Debbie's boyfriend, confronted the entity himself, not symbolically, not metaphorically, directly. He allegedly challenged whatever was tormenting the boy, telling it to leave David alone, and come into him instead. Which, in hindsight, sounds like the supernatural equivalent of saying, "I've got this under control." Lorraine Warren later described this moment as reckless and dangerous. She claimed Arne had been warned, that you don't challenge something you don't understand. And this is where the story becomes deeply uncomfortable, because whether or not an entity existed, Arne believed he had opened a door. And belief alone can change behavior in ways that feel frighteningly real. After that alleged moment, people close to Arne began noticing changes. Not dramatic, cinematic ones. No spinning heads. No theatrical possession. Instead, the kind of changes that disturb precisely because they're subtle. Periods of absence. Sudden anger. Blackouts. Moments where he seemed disconnected, like someone else was sitting behind his eyes. And later, this detail would matter more than anything else. Because when asked about the crime, Arne would claim he did not remember everything that happened. On February 16, 1981, nothing about the day suggested it would become historic. Arne skipped work. He joined Debbie at the kennel where she worked. Alcohol entered the picture. And with it, lowered inhibition and sharpened emotions. Alan Bono was there. Tension grew slowly. Jealousy surfaced. Words were exchanged. The kind of argument where everyone feels control slipping, but no one leaves the room. And then, in a moment that lasted seconds and destroyed multiple lives, a knife was drawn. Alan Bono was stabbed repeatedly. He did not die immediately. He died hours later. Arne was later found disoriented, making contradictory statements, asking for help, struggling to explain what he had done. Soon after, he was arrested. The town was stunned, and the legal system began doing what it always does, turning chaos into paperwork. But the story didn't stay inside the courtroom for long. According to reports, the day after the crime, Lorraine Warren contacted the police. Her claim was simple and explosive. Arne Johnson had been possessed when he committed the killing. The media reacted instantly. Headlines spread. Television seized the story. Newspapers transformed a homicide into a cultural event. The phrase, "the devil made me do it," burned itself into public consciousness. And here's the irony. The demon had not been proven to exist. But the headline already did. Defense attorney Martin Minella attempted something unprecedented. He argued that Arne was not guilty because he was under demonic control. The court, however, was not interested in belief. It was interested in evidence, standards, and logic that could be tested. Judge Robert Callahan rejected the defense, not as a philosophical statement, but as a legal necessity. The courtroom would not become a place where faith battled law.
Without that argument, the defense had to rely on what the justice system recognizes: lack of intent, emotional distress, intoxication, chaotic circumstances. By that point, the public had already chosen its version of events. In November 1981, Arne Johnson was convicted of manslaughter. He received a sentence of 10 to 20 years, though he served significantly less. Legally, the case ended. Psychologically, it never did. Believers continued to ask whether something had entered him, and whether it ever left. Skeptics asked a different question: how a supernatural explanation became more compelling than reality itself. As years passed, the case was retold in books, interviews, television specials, and films. With each retelling, details shifted. Some family members later disputed parts of the story. Critics accused the Warrens of exaggeration and commercialization. Others defended them as sincere believers confronting something they thought was real. The case became less about what happened, and more about who controlled the narrative. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Because the true horror here isn't a demon with horns. It's the idea of losing authorship over yourself. Of waking up knowing you did something irreversible and not recognizing the person who did it. Of needing an external force to explain an internal collapse. So let me ask you something quietly. What if "the devil made me do it" isn't about the devil at all? What if it's about the unbearable weight of being the only one responsible? In the end, the court judged a man, not a demon, but the uncertainty, the sense that something was left unresolved, was never sentenced. Because stories like this don't end with verdicts. They end with silence. And silence, sometimes, is the loudest part of all.